In this video we want to talk about the concept of core and peripheral workers. However, before we get into that, we want to talk about the concept of flexibility, which will lead us into a more detailed discussion of the core and periphery. Workplace flexibility has gained considerable attention over the last decade. There's more talk about it, and there's more understanding of the needs for flexibility and indeed the advantages of flexibility. There's a growing demand for organizations to offer this type of work because society has become somewhat more complex. There are more opportunities for workers to perhaps work from home or to work on a more flexible basis because of technology and because of current working practices. But also organizations require more flexibility because we tend to be moving towards a 24-hour working day. We tend to see different practices in play now than in the past. For example, in the UK, supermarkets are open on Sundays. Not so long ago, all shops were closed on a Sunday. We see deliveries being made from online organizations, and the deliveries are on Saturdays and Sundays. There's more flexibility within the labour market. There's more flexibility required by organizations, and in a sense there's more flexibility required by workers as well. Workers who perhaps have young families and need to have flexibility to accommodate family requirements. So there's a greater recognition for the need and indeed the advantages of flexibility. The changing nature and attitudes to work have put emphasis on new approaches such as part-time, zero-hour, temporary, home working, subcontracting, and a range of contracts. Now, some of these have upsides and downsides, and they will be the subject matter of other videos. But all we need to establish here is that the fact is that there is a greater movement towards flexibility, and the movement is not just from organizations requiring it, it's movement from the workers and the employees requiring flexibility also. Globalization has given rise to international competition. In order to compete with international markets, flexibility offers a cheaper alternative to labour costs. So with cheap imports, for example, organizations need to have flexibility and be able to move their employees around so as to try to compete effectively with the cheaper imports and with the volume of imports that we're experiencing. So there is greater need for the organizations to have flexibility and be able to deploy their workforce in a way which maximizes the return. It enables the organizations to generate profits and survive in highly competitive markets. Privatization focuses on profitability and cutting costs by reducing workers. There's greater understanding of the role of technology, and there's also the need for rationalization, perhaps where in the past companies would exist on different sites, would have plants on different sites. Now there's perhaps a greater understanding that there needs to be rationalization and cost cutting and a more critical view of industrial practices so as to reduce costs and enable the organization to compete internationally. Certainly it's the case with privatization, moving from state-owned bodies to private organizations. There's more emphasis on the need for flexibility, more need for profits, the more need for commercial survival. Perhaps in the past those organizations would survive because if they ran a deficit on their account, the taxpayer would be required to plug the difference. So there's more emphasis on the market and on the rigors of the market, and because of that there is greater requirement for flexibility. As I said, technological advancement has put jobs at risk by reducing the need for full-time workers. So the workers recognize that they're not just in competition with each other, they're in competition with the technology as well. Where a function in the past might require 2 or 3 people to complete the function, now technology is able to intervene and bring back information and process information that in the past was nigh impossible for operators to do within a reasonable time scale. So the onset of computing power and sophisticated computer packages and so on has meant the greater need for flexibility on the part of the workforce. So the whole idea of flexibility, which has come to the fore probably in the last 10 years or so, is to generate more efficiency. So the organization has a need for flexibility, but the employees see the need for flexibility as well, and they also require it because of their own family circumstances perhaps. So the push for flexibility is coming in both directions, so therefore it's almost inevitable that it will become a part of the working scene in the future. The social and cultural climate has changed. People's attitudes and nature to work has put pressure on organizations to be flexible. So people are pushing the organizations to be flexible about timekeeping, for example, or flexible in terms of the job roles and what's required within the job roles. The organizations need to be flexible as well. They need to meet the requirements of the market. And with the pressures from technology and the pressures from internationalization and globalization, it's almost inevitable that the organizations want flexibility. So as I said, it's coming from two sides, and therefore it will be a part of the working climate in the future. The increase in female workers has put emphasis on flexible working methods. It's broadly recognized now that females constitute a bigger proportion of the student population than in the past. They have more skills, more abilities, more competencies, but they also perhaps have family obligations. They have children, so they need to be flexible. And the organizations who wish to have these skilled workers need to be flexible to accommodate their needs. They have family commitments, as I said, and may not be able to work full time, or may not be able to work times that are set down on the basis of historic working practices. So organizations need to look at what is acceptable and perhaps move away from a 9 to 5 mentality or an 8 to 6 mentality or whatever they had, and look at what is required in today's market. John Atkinson introduced his model of the flexible firm in 1984. Human resources must be efficiently utilized. Human resources are a scarce commodity. It's a scarce resource, and therefore it's a valuable resource, and it should be used efficiently. The model focuses on management techniques in restructuring and organizing the workforce. So the model looks at how the workforce can be restructured and organized in a way that will use the workforce most efficiently. The Atkinson's model is used by many organizations in the UK. The model offers greater flexibility for both the employees and the employer. So it meets the requirements coming from the workforce for more flexibility and the requirements of the organization for more flexibility. It's based on segmenting the workforce into two categories. The core, the group of employees that are vital for the organization's functioning. These core workers are essential. These are fundamental to the existence of the organization. And then there's also the periphery, the group of employees available to meet short-term labour demands. They're not essential, but from time to time organizations may need more workers, or they may need workers to perform more general tasks. These are the periphery. So there are two types, the core and the periphery. A third group is composed of external workers, usually employed on a subcontracted basis. Sometimes organizations employ other organizations to supply particular services or functions, or they may outsource certain aspects of their work to other organizations to complete. And this will be done on a subcontracted basis. So if we look at the Atkinson model in this context, we have these outside agencies, the agency workers, the outsourcing, the subcontracting, the self-employed. And inside we have what's known as the first peripheral group and the secondary peripheral group. I'll explain what these mean shortly. But we have within the first peripheral group, we have the secondary internal labour market and the numerical and functional flexibility. And then we have the secondary external labour market, and we have numerical flexibility. So we have the first peripheral group and the second peripheral group. And inside we have the core workers, the primary labour market, the functional flexibility that's required in there. So the core workers are the ones who essentially constitute the business. Those are the workers who do the fundamental work, the core work, the essential work of the organization. They may be highly skilled in particular functions, but they may also be able to step in and perform other functions if a member of staff is away ill or is on holiday or whatever. But these are core workers. These are the essential workers. Now what I'm going to do is talk about these various types of workers and look at what's meant by them. So it's worth making a note of this sketch, this diagram here. Just make a rough note of it, stop the video, make a rough note and indicate where they are, because I'm going to talk now about these various headings. Okay, so let's move. So Atkinson's model focuses on types of flexibility and refers to two key terms. Functional flexibility. This is related to employees on a full-time and permanent contract. Employees are expected to go beyond their employment contracts and adapt to a range of job tasks when required by the organization. So these are the workers who are on full-time contracts, permanent contracts, and are expected to go beyond their employment contracts and adapt to a range of jobs and tasks when required by the organization. Numerical flexibility mainly concerned with flexible working contracts, for example part-time, temporary, 0 hours, flexi-time and so on. This group of people are employed to fulfill short-term needs. It's numerical flexibility. They're doing not such skilled roles, but that they are doing particular functions that are required, but they're not core. They are not essential in that sense. The core workers are the ones who are doing very fundamental work that's core to the business. The peripheral are doing general tasks and perhaps are on different types of contract. So we have two types of flexibility in terms of the model here. One, we have functional flexibility, and the second, numerical flexibility. Now the core. Well, the core is the central group of employees and the most important employees in the organization. The core group consists of Functionally flexible employees, they play a key role in in the needs of the labour demands. So they are the ones who essentially keep the organisation running. These are core, they're doing essential work. They're regarded as the internal labour market. These are the essential workers, they are the organisation. They are doing essential work and they're regarded as the internal labour market. They're the only group that are permanent and are stable. So these are the essential workers within the organisation. They're on permanent contracts and they're the stable employees of the business. It may be difficult to replace them. They have got certain skills, knowledge and experiences. It's very difficult to replace them, in fact, because they know the business, they know the requirements of the business, they know the types of production, they've got skills, knowledge, experience. The core group are expected to be functionally flexible, multi-skilled, able to meet and exceed labour demands. So they're able to work out what's required and complete the task, perhaps with minimal supervision, sometimes no supervision. But also they're able to help out their colleagues and fill gaps if gaps arise. Perhaps someone's away ill or on holiday, they're able to step across and help out in other areas. They know what's required by the organisation. They know what the tasks are, and they have, over a period of time, acquired the skills and the knowledge to be able to complete those tasks. They've been trained and retrained and redeployed, perhaps many times within the organisation. Perhaps they've moved role from one particular task to another. Or perhaps the company operates revolving tasks where the workforce are constantly moved round to give them wider experiences. But it all enhances the importance of these workers. These are the core for the business. Now the periphery, well, this group consists of employees that are mainly numerically flexible. This group of employees are required to meet changing labour demands. For example, there could be more demand for the product for the business and production has to be stepped up. So extra workers may be required. Or it may be that the organisation has changed in some way in terms of its layout or its design, and it needs additional personnel to perform more routine tasks. Employees tend to be employed on short-term basis and are expected to work as and when required. They may be part-time workers, they may be workers who come in the evenings or at the weekends. They're not core to the business. The jobs they complete, the tasks they complete, are generally speaking low-skilled tasks, routine type tasks. An employer may consider the periphery group because the employees can easily be replaced as skills are easily available in the labour market. So it's easy to find replacements. If these workers leave, or if at certain times it's perhaps even difficult to find workers, it's by changing the terms of the contracts, it may be easy to pick them up. They may overcome that problem. So employees that are on the periphery are, generally speaking, quite easy to find. If there are shortages, then by varying the contract, by upping the pay rate slightly perhaps, it's easy to find those workers. The tasks that they're given to the workers are, as I said, low skilled tasks, easy to complete, and perhaps the workers are on flexible contracts. So they're only needed to complete particular tasks, and usually quite easy tasks. They're only required during peak times to meet labour demands. Generally speaking, the organisation will have a set routine, what we would broadly term normal working. And normal working will be to meet the requirements of its customers, which may be stable over time. However, there may be certain times where there is a peak in demand for whatever reason. It could be seasonal, it could be festive, coming up to the Christmas period perhaps, or something of this nature, in which case the organisation will take on extra workers, and these will be peripheral workers. Atkinson divided the periphery into groups. The first peripheral group and the second peripheral group. Now, this part of the group, the first peripheral group, is an addition to the internal labour market. The group can comprise of numerical and functional flexibility. In other words, the first peripheral group, they're quite important. They may be used for certain functional tasks, perhaps working on manufacturing the product or enabling production to take place, facilitating production, working with perhaps more skilled workers, or being involved in the whole production process. Generally speaking, the first peripheral group are quite important. They are peripheral. They are on perhaps part-time contracts, but they're brought in because they have got particular skills and they perhaps have come back from retirement to work for a limited period of time. The employees have some form of permanent contract with the organisation. It could be, or a permanent arrangement with the organisation that in certain time periods, if the organisation experiences a surge in demand, they can be called upon. They tend to offer lower skills, which impacts on their degree of involvement. There may be lower skills because the workers are, in a sense, outside of the organisation and they've become de-skilled. Perhaps in the past they were skilled workers, but because of, let's say, retirement, they have become de-skilled. It could be, of course, that they were not a part of the core in the past, or they were not particularly skilled workers in the past, but they are now seen as reliable if the organisation calls on them. So they're part of the first periphery group, and they are willing to come back and perform tasks within the organisation during those peak demand periods. Due to lower skill level, this group do not have job security compared to the core group. They are likely to be the first to be laid off, in fact. So they don't have the same job security as the core. In times of cutbacks, the organisation are more likely to cut back on this particular group. The second peripheral group, this consists of external labour markets and are in unstable position regarding job security. The group is mainly numerically flexible. Employees are employed on a short-term basis to meet labour demands. They can be employed part-time, temporary, and on a range of flexible contracts. Now, the final group identified by Atkinson's model is the external subcontracted group. This group are external and not employed by the organisation. Instead, they are subcontracted. The organisation sometimes, instead of performing the tasks itself, it subcontracts particular tasks to outside companies or agencies, or indeed to individuals outside. So it's not a regular task or a regular job. It's one that's performed as and when required. Subcontracted, freelance and agencies are becoming increasingly popular with organisations. The reason for that is because the organisation doesn't want to have to scale up and scale down its workforce every time there's a surge in demand. It's a costly exercise recruiting and then laying off workers. It's it saps the resources of the organization. So it's better to deal with agencies that are external to the organization and subcontract the work to them. It's cheaper. They meet the surge demand and perform the various tasks, and when it's completed, that contract is over. There's no agreement between them. The external group tends to be temporary and easily replaced due to competition. Now, the external group is considered cost effective by an organisation as it reduces labour costs. As I said, the organisation doesn't want to scale up its workforce in times of an increased demand, only to find it has to scale it back down when the demand falls off. So rather than do that, it subcontracts the work. There are concerns over quality and commitment from external groups. They're not part of the organisation and therefore don't share the company vision. And this could be particularly serious in the context of quality. So the company has to institute rigorous quality checks on work carried out externally. External groups are professionally qualified and consists of self-employed, agency workers, subcontractors and outsourcing agencies. But as I said, there is a need to police the quality of the work undertaken by these workers. So this is the basis for this idea of the core and periphery workforce. It's important, having completed this class, to understand what's meant by core workers and what's meant by peripheral workers. Look at the attributes of both. The Atkinson model will be dealt with more fully and more formally in a separate video. But for the moment, this introduces the idea of core and periphery, which is what is essential to this particular class. And that's what we're going to deal with in this situation. Let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.